أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Dear friends, all of you are welcome to the Idea Foundation Forum. Idea Foundation under its Quranic research program has started first serial program under the title Allah, Quran and Insan. In the last program, Part-5 of Man versus Iblis, we discussed prophetic mission with reference to Hazarat Noah and Hazarat Abraham. Today, we will continue our discussion on Part-6 of Man versus Iblis, Clash of Good and Evil, with reference to prophetic mission of Hazarat Moses alayhi salam. In the Arabic literature, the word Pharaoh has its origin in Fir'aun, which literally means the offspring of the sun god. The ancient Egyptians worshipped the sun, which was called Ra. For them, Ra was the supreme lord and Fir'aun was named after it. As per their tradition and creed, every ruling elite based its authority on its relation to Ra and claimed to be its incarnation and representative on the earth. Every ruler of the royal dynasty that held the power in Egypt in the 13th century BC adopted the title of Fir'aun in order to show to the people that he was the supreme lord. In the Quranic references, two different pharaohs have been mentioned in the story of Hazrat Moses. Ramesses II was the one who was ruling over Egypt when Moses was born and who brought him up in his own palace. The second was Nepta, the one whom Moses invited to accept the divine message of Allah and confronted him for the release of the children of Israel, and who was ultimately drowned. Egypt was rich in agriculture and other natural resources that had attracted Israelites from the neighboring regions. Initially, they could get considerable politico-economic strength in various pockets of Egypt. But with the establishment of the Pharaoh dynasty, Israelites gradually lost their socio-economic position and they were finally driven to accept slavery when the pharaohs reached at the apex of their power. At the time of Ramesses II, before the birth of Prophet Moses, the Pharaoh's great kingdom of Egypt had extended from Syria to Libya and from the Mediterranean Sea to Abyssinia. The Egyptian society was divided in very distinct three classes. The most privileged class was an elite group of people possessing large land holdings, trading business, companies of slaves, and important royal titles and public offices. They were in fact the bedrock of the great kingdom of its time. They enjoyed proximity of the king and influence in the governance. Other class was a majority of tax-paying free citizens. They had precedence over the slaves, but they were socio-politically oppressed and economically exploited masses, having little role in the public affairs. Israelites were slaves, having no citizens' rights, and they were mastered by the elite class as forced labor for their construction works and laborious services. They were traded in the slavery market like any other household items. The pharaohs and the elites were conscious of the historic religion of the Israelites, which had taught them the oneness of Allah, divinity of man's life, social justice, economic equity, and collective well-being of the human society, as they were taught by Prophet Moses. These holy concepts were in conflict with their supremacy and right to rule on the basis of materialism, individualism, and determinism. Many of the elites knew the reality of divinity, but they were not ready to acknowledge it publicly, as they had to admit the divine principles of equity, social justice, and collective well-being, which did not suit the ruling elite. Ibleesiat was in continuum. That was in the time of Hazarat Noah, that was there in the time of Hazarat Ibrahim, and so was during this period of Hazarat Moses. Pharaoh, like Nimrud, his spiritual predecessor of Abraham's era, protected his despotic and elitist rule by concentrating all the sources of wealth and power in a few hands, far eliminating any threat to their despotic and elitist rule. The worst type of genocide was practiced against Israelites. Under the royal orders, every newborn boy of an Israelite mother was to be killed within a few hours of his birth. However, Allah miraculously saved Prophet Moses from the wicked designs of Pharaoh, as he previously saved Hazrat Ibrahim from such designs of Nimrud. Nimrud and Pharaoh are the representatives of Iblis in their respective eras. They are in fact symbol of Ibleesiat. They are assigned to create a wedge between the man and his creator. Pursuing the cause of Iblis, they wanted to deprive the man of his honored status he was accorded at the time of his creation. They wanted to accomplish the task of their master Iblis by destroying the faith of Adam's descendants in the oneness of Allah, as Iblis announced at the creation of the man. لَإِنْ أَخَّرْتَنِي إِلَى يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ لَأَحْتَنِكَنَّ ذُرِّيَّتَهُ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. If you delay me until the day of resurrection, I will surely destroy his descendants, except for a few. They proclaimed themselves to be the Supreme God and Supreme Lord because they wanted to undermine oneness of Allah and His sovereignty over the universe. They preached finality of matter, which is materialism, because they wanted to distance the man from God and his faith in the divinity. They promoted worldly charms and materialism because they wanted to flout the faith in the day of judgment. They imbued determinism in the human mind because they wanted to deprive the man of his free personality. If Ibleesiat, Nimrudiyat, Pharaoniyat, and the forces of evil accept the oneness of Allah, the divinity of the man and the universe, and the laws of nature, calling for equity, justice, and collective well-being of humanity, their castles of elitism, individualism, materialism, and determinism will collapse like the house of cards. The Prophet mission through the ages fought against these said evil forces, and ultimately Allah blessed the humanity with great victory over the evil forces in establishing sovereignty of Allah, equity, justice, and collective well-being of the humanity. Now let us see how the Quran explains the final triumph of Prophet Moses over pharaohs in upholding the cause of Allah and saving the Israelites and other destitute people of Egypt from the oppressive and tyrannical rule of the inhuman and devious elite of Pharaoh's time. The struggle of Prophet Moses for the cause of Allah is described in Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-Ma'idah, Surah Al-Araf, Surah Yunus, Surah Al-Isra, Surah Bani Israel, Surah Al-Kahf, Surah Maryam, Surah Taha, Surah Al-Mu'minun, Surah An-Naml, Surah Al-Qasas, Surah Az-Zukhruf. These Quranic references comprise of more than 343 ayat. Just imagine. However, I will quote here only a few of them concerning the current topic. Surah Baqarah, Surah Yunus, Surah Al-Qasas reveal the socio-political and economic conditions prevailing in the Pharaoh's kingdom. However, for the purpose of brevity, 1 ayat 4 of Surah Al-Qasas is quoted here. Inna fir'auna ala fil arzi wa jala ahlaha shiyan yastaz'ifu ta'ifatum minhum yuzabbihu abna'ahum wa yastahyi nisa'ahum innahu kana minal mufsidin. Let's translate me. Indeed, Pharaoh exalted himself in the land and made its people into factions, divided them, oppressing a sector among them, slaughtering their newborn sons and keeping their female alive. Indeed, he was of the corrupters. Under these conditions, Allah sent Hazarat Moses to Pharaoh with a mission to invite him to the oneness of Allah and His sovereignty, advise him against the oppression and get rid of slavery for the Israelites. It was first public pronouncement of Hazrat Moses as the Prophet of Allah in the royal court of Pharaoh as mentioned in ayat 75 of Surah Yunus. فَأَتِيَاهُ فَقُولَا إِنَّا رَسُولَ رَبِّكَ فَأَرْسِلْ مَعَنَا بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ وَلَا تُعَذِّبْهُمْ قَدْ جِئْنَاكَ بِآيَاتٍ مِّن رَبِّكَ وَالسَّلَامُ عَلَى مَنِ اتَّبَعَ الْهُدَى. So go to him and say, indeed, we are messengers of your Lord. So send with us the children of Israel and do not torment them. We have come to you with a sign from your Lord, and peace will be upon he who follows the guidance of Allah. Pharaoh challenged the truth of Prophet Moses and arrogantly asked, as revealed in ayat 106 of Surah Al-Araf, Kala in kunta jita bi ayatin fati biha in kunta minas sadiqin. Pharaoh said, if you have come with a sign, then bring it forth, if you should be of truthful. It was a challenge by Pharaoh. Allah had blessed Hazrat Moses with two divine miracles to prove his prophethood. Thus, he threw his staff. And suddenly it turned into a serpent. What is serpent? A very large snake. And then he drew out his hand from his garment, which was shining white with radiance that could be observed by everyone sitting in the court, as revealed in ayat 107 and 108 of Surah Al-Araf. It was an evident and very clear proof of divinity and prophethood of Hazrat Moses. But as seen in the history previous as well, the elite tried to confuse the truth by creating doubts to protect the status quo, continuity of their exploitative interests, and tyrannical rule, as Surah Al-Araf further reveals. Qal al-Mala'u. What is Mala'u? The elite class, eminent people. Qal al-Mala'u min qawmi Fir'auna inna hazara lisahirun alim. Said the eminent, the elite among the people of Pharaoh, indeed, this is a learned magician. He is not a divine person, not a prophet of God, but a magician. It was to divert the attention of the people. They further said, Yuridu an yukhrijakum min arzikum famaza ta'murun. Who wants to expel you? They were instigating Pharaoh, elites were instigating Pharaoh, who wants to expel you from your land through magic. So what do you instruct? What should be done with Hazrat Moses? Knowing the truth of Hazrat Moses' claim of prophethood, the elites of the court intrigued to prove his claim false. The well-known magicians of the kingdom were invited to undermine the reality of divine miracles. When the magicians threw their ropes and staffs on the field, they appeared to be the creeping snakes. When Hazrat Moses threw his staff, the serpent instantly finished all the snakes of the magicians. When the learned magicians knew the truth of the miracles, they immediately submitted to the faith of Moses, to the annoyance of Pharaoh and his elites. It was again the repetition of history when the powerful elite failed in argumentation and logic. They turned to tyranny and persecution of the believers. Let us see how the Quran describes the wrath of Pharaoh and his elites. Ayat 29 of Surah Ash-Shura says, قَالَ لَإِنَّ اتَّخَذْتَ إِلَهًا غَيْرِ لَأَجْعَلَنَّكَ مِنَ الْمَسْجُونِينَ. Pharaoh said, if you take a god other than me, I will surely place you among those imprisoned. This was a threat of Pharaoh to Hazrat Moses. Ayat 124 of Surah Al-Araf further says, لَأُقَطِّعَنَّ أَيْدِيَكُمْ وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ مِنْ خِلَافٍ ثُمَّ لَأُصَلِّبَنَّكُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. Now Pharaoh is saying to the magician who had accepted the faith of Moses, I will surely cut off your hands and your feet on opposite sides, then I will surely crucify you all. The elite and courtiers provoked Pharaoh in the name of honor and egotism, and thus the persecution of the Israelites was further reinforced, leading to their genocide as mentioned in Ayat 127 of Surah Al-Araf. وَقَالَ الْمَلَأُ مِنْ قَوْمِ فِرْعَوْنَ أَتَذَرُ مُوسَى وَقَوْمَهُ لِيُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَيَذَرَكَ وَآلِهَتَكَ. And the eminent among the people of Pharaoh said, will you leave Moses and his people to cause corruption in the land and abandon you and your gods? It was instigation. قَالَ سَنُقَتِّلُ أَبْنَاءَهُمْ وَنَسْتَحْيِي نِسَاءَهُمْ وَإِنَّا فَوْقَهُمْ قَاهِرُونَ. Pharaoh said, we will kill their sons and keep their women alive, and indeed we are subjugators over them. To demonstrate his material might, like Nimrod's Tower of Babel, he also built a tower as revealed in Ayat 38 of Surah Al-Qasas. And Pharaoh said, O eminent ones, O elite, I have not known you to have a god other than me. Then ignite for me, O Haman. Haman was one of the leaders. O Haman, a fire upon the clay, and make for me a tower, that I may look at the God of Moses. And indeed, I do think he is among the liars. Look at the similarities of Ibleesiat. Nimrod built a tower and claimed to have access to heaven through his tower. And here Pharaoh built a tower to look at the God of Moses. This is common tradition of the Ibleesiat to undermine divinity and sovereignty of Allah through materialistic means to protect their worldly, individualistic and elitist interests. They claim to be subjugators over the Israelites as a matter of right to force them accepting it as their destiny. Thus the materialism and determinism were the favorite tools in the historic legacy of the Ibleesiat. Dilemma of silent majority in the era of Moses was as evident as it had been in the era of Hazarat Noah and Ibrahim. Ayat 83 of Surah Yunus reveals, فَمَا آمَنَ لِمُوسَى إِلَّا ذُرِّيَّةٌ مِّن قَوْمِهِ عَلَىٰ خَوْفٍ مِّن فِرْعَوْنَ وَمَلَئِهِمْ أَن يَفْتِنَهُمْ وَإِنَّ فِرْعَوْنَ لَعَالٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَإِنَّهُ لَمِنَ الْمُسْرِفِينَ. But no one believed Moses except some youth among his people for fear of Pharaoh and his establishment, his kingdom, that they would persecute them. And indeed Pharaoh was haughty within the land, and indeed he was of the transgressors. As the forces of Ibleesiat saw dreadful end in the era of Hazrat Noah and Abraham, the oppression and tyranny of the Pharaoh's dynasty met with the same awful end, which will be remembered as a frightening lesson of history for the forces of evil, for the followers of Ibleesiat in the time to come. The closing episode of the Pharaoh's dynasty and the closing scene of its extinction from the face of this earth is described in the Quran. Ayat 90 of Surah Yunus says, and we took the children of Israel across the sea, and Pharaoh and his soldiers pursued them in tyranny and enmity until when all of them drowned. He said, when Pharaoh was drowning, he said, I believe that there is no deity except that in whom the children of Israel believe, and I am of the Muslim. Ayat 50 of Surah Baqarah says, and recall when we parted the sea, parted in two parts. Water was on this side, water was on this side, and there was a dry land for the children of Israel. And recall when we parted the sea for you and saved you and drowned the people of Pharaoh while you were looking on them. Allah made the end of Pharaoh a living, fearsome reminder for the Ibleesiat of the coming ages by preserving his body as the evidence of history. Ayat 92 of Surah Yunus revealed this fact 1400 years ago, which stands proven today. فَالْيَوْمَ نُنَجِّيكَ بِبَدَنِكَ لِتَكُونَ لِمَنْ خَلْفَكَ آيَةً. So today we will save you in body, in physical body, that you may be those who succeed you a sign, a symbol. So dear friends, we stop our discussion here today. These programs are recorded both in Urdu and English. Their videos can be watched on ideafoundation.com.pk web or its YouTube channel and Facebook. Their written versions are also available on the Idea Foundation's website for ready reference. Please note code number of this program, Idea 1A R3 Part-6. All friends are requested to subscribe the Foundation's YouTube web channel for the benefit of this noble cause. Thank you friends for your participation. Allah Hafiz.